Well, of course, prostitution is something that doesn't go away, is it? We've got it in our society, and it brings people down. It's a horrible thing, as if we can legislate it away. In Europe, they've realized you can't legislate morality. You can't make a law that says people have to be moral. You can make a law that says you can't hurt other people, but they've given up trying to legislate morality. It's just a sort of an enlightenment they've got that they think we could learn from. I don't think anybody says prostitution is good. I just think people acknowledge it's not going to go away. Why don't we regulate it? Why don't we take the disease out of it? Why don't we tax it? Why don't we give the prostitutes a union? Why don't we have a red light district where when the prostitute gets in trouble, she can push her emergency cord and a pimp doesn't come to bail her out, but a policeman does? That's the ideal in the Netherlands and in countries where they have legal prostitution. It's an ugly scene for most people, but it's an attempt to take the disease and the crime out of it. It's not foolproof, but they're trying to deal with a persistent problem in a creative and a pragmatic way. Here is a pragmatic solution for a problem that all of us have dealt with in the past, perhaps. When kids graduate, they get drunk, and some of them die on the roads. Ann and I have a girl that's graduating this year, and like any parents of a senior, we're worried about this. In Scandinavia, the kids graduate and none of them die on the roads because the parents pay for the keggers. Every time when you go to Scandinavia in May and June, the streets are noisy with these kids just having a wild time in the back of flatbed trucks, hollering their heads off, drunk as can be, going from parent to parent, drinking beer. Now the fact is, the parents in Scandinavia would rather have their kids not lie to them. They want to provide a driver. They want the kids to have a great time and not kill themselves. That's a tough sell for Americans who are much more scared about kids drinking alcohol. But of course, Europe is different than that, and I think they lose a lot less kids in their kind of love than we do with our kind of love. Again, a humbling, different approach that might not be saleable here, but it works well for them. I was just in Zurich in Switzerland at Starbucks. I had to go downstairs to the bathroom, and I went into the bathroom, and it was all blue lights. Blue lights, what's going on? I couldn't find my veins. I couldn't shoot up. They don't want their junkies shooting up in their public bathrooms. Now, we don't have junkies shooting up in our bathrooms because they're all either in jail or dead. They've got junkies in Europe, and you see them on the streets, and it's off-putting, and a lot of Americans go, what an ugly situation. Why can't they get their act together? It's a different approach to drug policy. I've been really interested in this lately. I've learned a lot about it. I've talked a lot about it. I just think we are dealing with a persistent drug abuse problem in our country. It's a serious problem. We're throwing billions of dollars at it. We're ruining hundreds of thousands of lives by needlessly criminalizing things. Now, I'm not quite into, thank you. The idea of decriminalizing all drugs is something that's interesting to talk about, and a lot of smart people are in favor of that, but I'm what they would call an incrementalist. I would just think it makes sense to first stop the war on marijuana and deal with it as a health problem. But bottom line, a society that's enlightened would measure the effectiveness of its drug policy by a concept called harm reduction, rather than how many people do you lock up. We measure the effectiveness of our drug policy by how high do you drive the substance value in the streets up, and how many people do you lock up? That's because it's part of the system. Every day in New York, 100 people are arrested for marijuana. Usually at the end of the day, the policeman gets a couple of hours overtime because it takes that long to book them, and they get time and a half. So the policeman got that. They got more arrests on their market, and the kid's got a record now that he can't get a loan for college, and that's going to send him down the wrong road instead of the right road. It's crazy from a European point of view. But let's just talk about the hard drugs and the needles here. When you go to that restroom you can't shoot up, what are you going to do then? Well, across the street, there is a machine that used to sell cigarettes. Now it sells syringes, government subsidized, 3 syringes for €2, less than $1 a piece. It's clean. It's not criminal. It's compassionate. And then you go down the street to a heroin maintenance clinic, and you get your fix. You get your counseling. You get a nurse to help you out. You get back off of welfare and into the employed workforce. In the United States, we lose 18,000 people a year to heroin overdoses. 18,000. In Europe, they lose 8,000. They handle it differently. No easy solution. They've tried and failed with all sorts of things, but they're dealing with it creatively. They're talking about it. They're compassionate. They're pragmatic. They want to take crime out of the equation so they can see it for what it is. It's a health problem for mixed up people who are screwing up their lives because they're addicted to heavy drugs. When you go to the Netherlands, when you go all over Europe, you find that things are more casual about marijuana. In Europe, they've got a pretty strict line. There's soft drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, and there's hard drugs. And you know, nobody's saying drugs are good. It's a serious problem here, it's a serious problem over there. They're dealing with it different than we are. When you think about marijuana, a joint in Europe is about as exciting as a can of beer. Okay? It's just not anything anybody's going to freak out over. You go to the Netherlands, you find these coffee shops with Rastafarian flags and all sorts of little symbols that mean that there's no coffee on sale in that building, all right? You got people hanging out, having a lazy time, listening to cool music, lots of brownies for sale, lots of munchies. You got loaner bongs, you can check your email. You got older people parking their bike, getting a baggie to go because they don't like the edgy vibe there in the coffee shop. The menu looks like a drug bust. It's an incredible thing, and for 15 years, they've been, you know, quasi-legal. It's not really legal, it's just decriminalized. But it's an attempt to be smart about drugs. And when you go to the Netherlands or when you go around Europe, you'll learn about their drug policy, and I learn about it by talking to policemen and reading websites and so on. In the Netherlands, you've got a 15-year track record now of not arresting people for marijuana. The police like it. The drug enforcement people know that it is not a gateway drug. First of all, more people don't smoke just because it's legal. In America here, there's a fear that there's a whole reservoir of people that just wish they could ruin their lives with drug abuse if only it was legal. This is laughable. 40 million Americans smoke pot recreationally. If you want marijuana, you can certainly get it. It's pretty hard to get arrested in a white suburb. You know, if you're poor and black, you can get arrested in a hurry with marijuana. It's a racist policy. It's an economic discrimination against lower class and people who really need a job and who need a loan and so on. Now, when you think about marijuana, you got to remember 800,000 people are arrested every year in our country for marijuana. 80,000 people are in jail today for smoking marijuana. Because I'm outspoken in this, I get to talk to a lot of people whose spouses are in jail. It's screwing up their family. It's very expensive for our system. There's a whole organization of retired police people called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I said retired because you can't speak about it until you're retired. Judges, policemen, advocates, and so on, once they retire, they can talk common sense about this. It's a very interesting thing. The King County Bar Association is famous in the United States as a leader in progressive drug policy issues. And they send their guys, their lawyers all over the country talking some common sense about drug policy. Here in Seattle, we're sort of a leader that way. That's why the ACLU has done this video with me here in Seattle. And we're running it on TV, and you can download it on Comcast if you like. But this whole marijuana thing is interesting, and you gotta just remember, in Europe they've learned that a society has to make a choice. Tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And the law needs to be revisited. Just like courageous people stood up in the 1930s to say this prohibition against alcohol is causing more problems than the problem it's trying to solve, right? When they finally said legalize alcohol, they didn't say booze is good. They said the law is counterproductive. And that's where we're coming to today. It's a fun thing to learn about. If you're curious about it, please take the initiative and check out some more stuff on that.